Hello, Crypto family. I am excited to bring you something. Now, I might get a monetization or a, video strike, but there is something I have got to tell you that is making me bullish as all bullish. Now, you got to understand, this guy, he is not even into crypto. And the fact that he's not in crypto makes me even more bullish because he doesn't understand exactly what's going to go down and how it's going to go down. And I am so excited to break this down. I'm going to buy so much crypto today, it's not even funny. I'm all in. Screw it.
Stablecoin. So we have all of these pieces falling into place, and perhaps not coincidentally, we've also seen central banks buying gold at record rates. Now, you say all of these are just data points that if you connect them together, you see a narrative that points towards a global monetary reset. And it all started for you in 2017 when you saw that the Bundesbank, Germany, was repatriating its gold. So why don't we take it from there, Andy? Break down your thesis, joining those dots for us.
Sure, thank you. That's well done. That's a good roadmap. So it's true. You know, at the end of 2011, as the bull market started to head down into a bear market, by 2017 we saw capitulation on many levels, not only with the retail investor, but also the central banks. Central banks were selling their gold. It really never made a whole lot of sense to me. And by 2017, we were at really at the peak of the bear market in precious metals. And this was when Bitcoin was taking off. And there were a lot of people selling their gold and talks of central banks divesting of gold and investing in treasuries or income-producing assets. And then out of nowhere, a story popped up that the Bundesbank had been trying to repatriate their gold for a few years, but started to really make a big deal of it in 2017. It caught my eye. Why would they want to repatriate their gold from the New York Fed in the midst of what seemed to be a movement away from precious metals and into other forms of investment? It was very interesting they made such a big deal. And within a few weeks of that, you had the Bank of Turkey and the Bank of Austria and the Dutch National Bank and the Czech National Bank and the Bank of Poland. And all of these banks, the Bank of Hungary, they were all saying, send us our gold back, not just from the New York Fed, but also from the Bank of England. And so it began a movement that really caught my eye. And now in 2018, the following year, this really accentuated when those same banks bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined. Now I'm starting to get really interested and really aware of what was happening. 2019 comes along, those numbers jump by almost 100%, north of 90%. The accumulation of gold by these central banks, which was out of nowhere, really, if we look back over the previous decade. And then the Bank of International Settlements came out with the declaration of revaluing gold as a high-quality liquid asset. Now, there's been some dispute, is it a tier one or is it a high-quality liquid asset? In the end, they're the same thing. It's as good as cash. When it's a hedge position, it is viewed by the Bank of International Settlements as good as cash. And I think if you look at that and realize that the acquisition of gold and the repatriation of gold, which was almost two and a half years prior to this admission, you wonder, were they clued in on the revaluation of gold or on the reclassification of it? Were they told, get your house in order, repatriate your gold? You might want to stop buying it because we're going to reclassify it as good as cash. So this really started to get me interested in what was happening. And
so just to interrupt you there, would the U.S. have been left out of that conversation?
no, they were not. This was all part of the Basel III.
Right, but I'm saying if they were telling central banks, you should start repatriating gold, this is what's going to happen.
Whether or not they were left out of it or they just decided not to do it or accumulated other ways is, I guess, debatable. And, you wonder where Gaddafi's gold is, where Saddam Hussein's gold is. Just saying, the Ukraine sold out of $25 billion worth of gold to fund the war. Where did that go? So I don't know where if the U.S. was accumulating gold or if they weren't, or if they were getting it in other ways. But the U.S. certainly wasn't part of the narrative. These were all the Eastern European banks. And ironically, most of the banks that were doing it were either part of the European Union or in that general region, but most of them did not trade the euro. They traded their own currency within the European Union. So these are the banks that I believe ultimately will shift towards the BRICS nations. I digress. 2020, I start to notice the second very interesting piece of the puzzle, and that was the Chinese Belt Road and Rail Initiative. And this is the largest infrastructure project in human history, and it's connecting Asia and Africa and parts of South America and Europe, the old Silk Road.
But that's been developing for, over a decade
now? It has been, but it really started to gain traction in 2020. And I'm looking at it and realizing that all 13 OPEC-producing countries are on the Belt Road, almost 70% of human population and 40% of global GDP on this growing group of countries. And it's all void of U.S. dollar participation. Most of it settling on the new Chinese digital yuan. And so I started to get this feeling that, look, a lot of the countries that are part of the Belt Road, China and India and Russia, and these are countries that are accumulating all of the gold and producing all of the gold. And you start to see this growing group of countries and kind of the isolation of the dollar. Now, this really didn't all fit into what I was talking about until shortly after 2021. 2020, the banks are still buying gold. And 2021 rolls around and we see the day that we leave Afghanistan in a very unharmonious way. Saudi Arabia, I think, at that point, signed the death warrant for the end of the petrodollar. The day we left Afghanistan or the day after, and I think there is no coincidence in the timing, Saudi Arabia announces a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia. I often ask...
And just to recap, leaving Afghanistan, deserting weapons, deserting allies, deserting personnel.
Leaving our own servicemen and women behind enemy lines was something that would have been considered inconceivable in the United States that I grew up in. And I think that really signaled something to our allies and certainly to our foes. And, I ask people what makes the dollar the world reserve currency. Most people don't know. But in 1974, 3 years after we closed the gold window, Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia and struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom and said, hey, we'll protect you, but for that, you'll denominate oil globally in dollars. And they have through OPEC. And this has created a massive synthetic demand for the dollar for the last 50 years. Signaling a change in that by a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia was a huge, huge move that really got very little, if any, attention in the Western media. But now things are really starting to click in for me. And I'm starting to see not only global de-dollarization, but also groupings that are growing together, like all 13 of the OPEC producing countries on the Belt Road, like shortly thereafter, China and Nigeria, who also signed the same contract with Russia, selling their gold to China for the Petro-Yuan bond, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And this is how countries like Iran have sidestepped sanctions for quite some time, selling their oil to China for a bond that is immediately convertible into gold, and they take possession of it right off the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So these things are starting to speed up at this point, and I'm really starting to notice that there's a growing group of countries that are formulating around the BRICS that are, I think, coalescing against the dollar, the hypocrisy, the hegemony of the dollar. And
now, for a lot of you guys that don't know, this has been a Bitcoin narrative for the longest. Russia, China, a lot of different countries are buying Bitcoin. And he is basically skipping around the whole narrative of Bitcoin.
You could see it, you could feel it, and you could watch all of the gold that was being sent eastward and the accumulation and the de-dollarization. 2022 rolls along and the weaponization of the dollar, as you mentioned, where I believe it's not the prerogative of the West to say who can and can't use the world reserve currency. It should be more for public opinion, not for the administrator of the currency to decide who can and can't use it. And it was that moment, and I often ask people, do you think this was intended? We have 130 trillion in debt, 31 trillion that's on balance sheet, and Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, which is 55 trillion underfunded in and of itself, and government military pensions, render us insolvent. Most of this debt accumulated at the lowest interest rates in human history. Was it intended? Did we want to pick a villain to create this great reset, to all of a sudden start the de-dollarization? And this is where the story gets very interesting as it turns from here.
Okay, well, let's revisit some of those points there. So the dollar starts to unravel in this narrative when Saudi Arabia starts to make deals with China and the petrodollar is in jeopardy. So you're saying Saudi Arabia is now looking at Russia for protection. And if you're Saudi Arabia, you're thinking two things. For one thing, you're watching how the dollar was weaponized in the invasion of Ukraine, and you're going, well, we don't want that. We can't have that happen to our assets. What if the U.S. wakes up one morning and don't like our human rights policies, for example, or something else, or some other situation that could happen in the Middle East and decides to do the same to us? Maybe this isn't the best way to keep our reserves. But you've also got Russia not really projecting tremendous strength via this conflict in Ukraine. So why would the Saudis make such a bold decision before seeing who is the bigger military power in play?
Yes, that is part of the equation. That's a fair statement. This was before the Ukraine invasion, number one. And secondly, the day after these announcements came out, Zero Hedge ran an article saying Saudi Arabia announces to the world that their nuclear submarines are outfitted with hypersonic ICBMs. This is the technology the West doesn't have. The State Department commented and said they're very concerned about it. These are the missiles that can go Mach 10 up in the atmosphere and hit the ground at the speed of an asteroid. That was, I think, their way of saying, don't even try to do what you did to Gaddafi and Hussein. Don't even think about it. It was a veiled threat, let's say. And I think this is another reason why when you realize that also last year we see the Saudis say, well, we have submitted our application to the BRICS. So you have a growing unison of countries that are joining together that in and of themselves maybe can't project that strength, maybe can't stand up to the West, but together as a group, their militaries are stronger, their GDPs are bigger. I think it's a growing chorus of countries standing up to that hypocrisy, standing up to the West in a way that they've never been able to do in and of themselves. And
well, we'll leave the word hypocrisy aside for now, but let's just say standing up to a system where the U.S. can continue to print dollars, and then that makes the debt that they owe the U.S. become bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely.
So we'll put aside the moral argument of the U.S.'s role on the global stage.
Yes, and it is a perceived hypocrisy. I'm not saying it is, but that's their perception.
That's a fair enough point. So we're going to see this bifurcation of the global monetary system.
Absolutely.
Break that down in further detail. How does this play out from here?
Well, you have all of these countries joining the BRICS that you put them all together along with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Belt Road. You're talking north of 80% of human population. And all it would take, now you have to remember, we're coming from a period of time where asset prices were blown sky high over the last several years with more money being created in the last 3 than in the history of the country preceding it. A lot of that money found its way into assets. And you have the
He's not wrong. If you look at the Amazon stocks, you look at any of the stocks, right after COVID, you're going to see a massive spike just in the charts. You could just go back, go look at the charts. You'll see it on Amazon. You'll see it on Tesla. A whole bunch of money just got injected, and it's unnatural.
misallocation and the distortions that were created by this. All it would take would be for Saudi Arabia to stand up on the stage, as they just told the folks at the Davos conference that we're now going to consider taking other currencies for oil. We've already been told that the BRICS currency would be pegged to gold or to commodities, and the assumption being gold being one of the commodities. I think all it would take would be Saudi Arabia to say to the West, thanks for the memories. It's been great. We appreciate it. But we're going to open up oil purchases in other currencies, not just dollars, maybe euros and ruble and rupee and gold. And all of a sudden, bang,
all those things he just mentioned, you can buy Bitcoin with and still sell Bitcoin to receive.
Countries that have had to hold dollars for the last 50 years no longer really have any interest in holding them. And if they all start to dump dollars, and I think it would happen quickly, where they would all dump dollars, you have a tsunami of inflation hitting the shores of the West that would immediately create a spike in interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. This is how we see a great reset, as interest rates spike in relation to a crashing dollar, which then is inversely correlated to asset prices that have gone stratospheric over the last few years, and I would argue irrationally. And as interest rates spike and this inverse correlation hits the shores, stocks, bonds, and real estate, along with the crashing dollar, all collapse at the very same time. And when
you notice how he didn't include Bitcoin or crypto. That's the funniest part of this all. He doesn't really even believe in crypto, but you notice how he didn't even mention it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because crypto is worldwide. It has been bought up worldwide. So if you currently own crypto right now, it can be converted into USDT, it can be converted into USDC, and you can sit there and turn around and it still has value, even with those assets going down.
ask, do you think it was intended? I guess I'm kind of tongue-in-cheek, but if you think about it, now you have a villain. Instead of blaming the Fed for creating these distortions and letting this happen, you have the...
Not to mention, the price of Bitcoin is going to skyrocket because the biggest mass adoption crutch for United States citizens is the fact that they're comfortable. When you're comfortable, you don't want to switch. You don't want to make a change. If the dollar becomes the equivalent of nothing, trust me, people are going to want to change over quickly, and you're going to see a massive spike real quick into Bitcoin.
They're saying they're going to raise rates, but they've done a woeful job at raising them high enough to tackle inflation.
All right, let's put a pause on that one before we get into the Great Reset, which I understand also opens the way for central bank digital currencies and a complete revamp of the system. And let's first focus on how we get to this de-dollarized global economy, or at least an economy where the dollar plays a less significant role. So in this bifurcation of the global monetary system, what relevance does the dollar have? It's still in play.
Yeah, the dollar will always have a relevance to it, and maybe it's not in its current state. But the thing that I think is really important to understand is that these agreements that are being made with the BRICS represent such a massive part of GDP and of population. At what point does the West decide to, or attempt to, trade with this group? Are they even going to be welcomed into it? I don't know. It just seems they're being isolated.
Well, because...
Whether they're isolated or not, just think about how much crypto and how much Bitcoin the United States owns. They are automatically, let's say this happens overnight. Let's say this happens tomorrow. You're not going to be able to sit there and use gold for trade. Think about it. Bitcoin, and other cryptos, you can break down like a currency where you're able to pay for stuff in small quantities. Like, you're not going to give a full gold bar for, especially being valued at what it's going to be valued, for a pencil or for, something small that you need, like a package of bacon. But with crypto, You will be able to do this. And anybody that owns crypto will be the only ones that have real value in real money that is worldwide. It still has value and can be traded at a somewhat normal consumption.
The dollar is so powerful, and because the United States has enjoyed so much privilege having a global reserve currency, why would it just give it up without a fight?
Well, they will fight, and they won't just give it up. But, a lot of people will make the analogy to the euro, that all these countries came together and it didn't work. And I think there's something to be said for that. But when you look at all of these countries coming together in a similar rallying cry, for whatever that rallying cry is against the West, it is the backing of the new system by commodities, and perhaps all of it denoted on a distributed ledger. The digital yuan, which has been running for the last 4 years, backing the Belt Road to the tune of over 20 billion in successful transactions, would be, I believe, the rails to a new BRICS currency that would show the immutability of what every country pegged or pledged to the new system. That gives it the glue to make it work, where everyone has the same equal footing, equal say at the table. This, to me, is what would make the system work, as Zoltan Pozsar calls it, a new system backed by commodities, Bretton Woods 3, rather than a system backed by debt instruments and promises.
And Andy, we have had other guests on the show, Frank Juster for one.
You're basically going back to what it used to be when it was backed and pegged 1-to-1 back in the 70s by Richard Nixon when he got rid of it. Got rid of the gold standard.
We mentioned this over a year ago, that he sees the trend developing where you will have a central bank digital currency or digital currency on the blockchain backed not to.
Did you not just hear that? Blockchain. He's referring to the blockchain, yet he wants to say that gold's going to be more valuable than Bitcoin if this happens? No, because you cannot trade on the blockchain with gold. Gold is an old asset. It is just a yellow rock. Oh, I'm so excited.
Necessarily pegged backed by gold and a basket of other commodities, and the transparency that the blockchain allows creates a sense of faith amongst the other countries, going to the expression that there's perhaps distrust amongst them with regards to how they handle their own affairs. So, but again, the idea that the United States is just going to hope that it will be included in this trade system, it just seems a bit far-fetched that they would.
They're not going to be. But the one thing the U.S. does have a lot of is blockchain, USDC, Bitcoin. They can transfer a lot of wealth through assets just by using what Circle, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, all these big banks are buying into, which is the USDC currency, which can in turn buy Bitcoin, can in turn buy blockchain, which in turn gives immense value here.
Be a more aggressive push to maintain that kind of status. Well, what would that look like?
I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm sure they'll resort to any and all options.
Is it a war? Is it a kinetic war?
It certainly looks like we're heading in that direction right now. With what's happening, we're funding the Ukraine to a total of almost $100 billion. We're selling them Stinger missiles and drones, providing, tanks and intelligence. I mean, you could argue in a court of law, we'd be an accomplice to a crime. You could argue we are moving in that direction, and maybe that is what they're going to resort to. But I don't know. And I think the bottom line is simply this: we are indebted to a level that will never pay it back, and interest rates are rising. So at what point do people want to start receiving something that is tangible for the commodities that they're trading or for the business that they're doing with a country that is paying them in inflated dollars? And certainly the treasury market is rife with risk at this point in a rising interest rate market.
They're not going to want to. Yes, they love the tangible idea of gold backing, the dollar, but that is the old monetary system. What don't people understand about this? This is literally new technology that is going to take over the world.
Market, I think the bloom is off the rose for the West. So what does it entail? How do they fight back? I'm sure they will, and maybe it is war. I don't know, but your point is valid.
Is the conflict then against the Saudis or the Chinese? Because it seems as though you're saying that the Saudis are the kingmakers in all of this if they come out and say no more petrodollar. So who would the U.S. potentially direct its wrath at?
That's a good question. I think the Saudis are joining the BRICS nations so that they have protection from countries that have the ability to back them and stand up to the West. I think, certainly the Saudis would be the linchpin of it all. Yeah. But if they're joining a group that has the ability to stand behind them and protect them as part of a unified nation or a unified group, it would seem that they're picking a fight with everybody.
Right. Well, let's focus on the R in the BRICS, and that's Russia, because a lot of this depends on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which many would say is a proxy war, with the US really being so active and participating, now sending tanks, which was a line they said that they wouldn't cross initially. Potentially, there's now a request from Ukraine for F-16s. We'll see if that happens. If Russia loses this war, what does it mean for this whole reset theory? Does it jeopardize the BRICS' ability to launch this currency that challenges the dollar?
You know, it may slow things down, it may derail it, it may change the way that it plays out. But look, ever since the sanctions, you're still seeing north of 80% of the world trading with Russia. It hasn't bothered the majority of the world. So, and I guess what does lose mean? I don't know. How bad does this get, and who gets dragged into it? There are a lot of what ifs and suppositions there. I don't know, and these are all valid points. And again, this is a chain of events that I've seen accumulating over time, and I guess there's fluidity to it. There's no question about it, and it certainly, it certainly changes, making this something that's cut and dry. There will be an outcome that I guess we'll have to see, but I don't think it changes the global de-dollarization, the global drive away from the dollars. And if Russia is hampered in any way by their ability to hold up their end of the bargain with the BRICS, so be it. I still don't think it changes the ultimate move away from the U.S.
Well,
dollar.
look, Andy, every global reserve currency known to man has lost its place in the sun. So it has been dethroned. It is sort of the natural cycle of events. And to your point about these countries sort of not really paying that much attention to the sanctions, we just had Yellen in South Africa speaking to President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, hey, you guys are kind of contravening the sanctions a little bit. You need to play nicely. But we don't know how much weight her word has if we're not seeing the U.S. willing to back it up with what, military, right? I mean, is that what it comes to? Why have people played along all this time? Was it because of the assumed military might of the United States?
I think that had a lot to do with it. And look, a lot of these countries a decade ago were in no position to do this. You know, when in 1974, when Kissinger signed this contract, the Middle East was a poor area. They weren't enriched and they weren't developed the way that they are right now. And you could say the same thing about China. The progression that they've made as an industrialized nation is extraordinary. So I guess it's just like you said, to your point.
By the way, what a lot of people don't know is we helped build up China in hopes that they would become our allies. In turn, they kind of stabbed us in the back, which kind of sucks. But this is what they're doing. They're trying to get away from the US dollar. We helped them kind of with an ulterior motive to be able to sit there and say, hey, now you're kind of entrenched into our US dollar. A lot of people don't know that.
It's the time. You go back to the 1400s, almost every currency had between an 80 and 100-year lifespan. We're already, we're on the outskirts of that, living on borrowed time, you could argue, from an historical perspective. So maybe we've just run the course of our currency.
Andy, who's on Team Dollar? Who would prefer the dollar other than the United States? Although you argue that this may be a way to reset everything, and we'll get back to that. But who would prefer for the dollar to maintain its status?
I suppose those countries that are part of the Western Alliance, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, Japan. And I don't know if they really do want it to continue. I don't know who is on Team Dollar. I guess I haven't thought that far out, to be quite honestly. I haven't thought about it that way. I guess all I'm looking at is mathematics. And when you see such a massive shift of human population coalescing against the dollar, and it's very obvious to see when you see shifts away from accepting the dollar for oil by countries already and admissions by Saudi Arabia to look to other currencies, I think you have to take a real hard look at what happens if all of a sudden the world doesn't need to own dollars to buy oil.
And it's not just oil, because we're seeing a move away from U.S. treasuries globally, well, certainly from China.
Of course. Not just China, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries. Why would anyone buy our treasuries earning 3% with inflation double that by metrics that arguably are wrong? I don't know if you've ever had John Williams with Shadow Stats on your show, but he'll show you numbers that the way the inflation was calculated prior to 1980, when they changed the numbers, and he would say inflation's at 15% right now. But even using 7% inflation with a 3.5% yield on the 10-year treasury, you're guaranteed a real return of negative 3.5% compounding over 10 years. Why would anyone want to do that? And so you're right, it's not just the dollar market, it is the treasury market. And we are incentivizing by the underperformance and the mismanagement of the dollar and what's happened to the yields on the treasuries for other people or for these countries to find other ways.
And I guess, they're looking at the U.S. with this unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus printing away and saying, well, now our debts are larger. The U.S. is just devaluing our reserves. So I can understand how the sentiment against the dollar would be building up in the scenario. So let's assume this does play out, and we do have a split in the monetary system, and the dollar loses its value, and perhaps this BRICS reserve currency, which is digital, which is backed by commodities, comes into play and becomes a leading player on the global stage. Walk us through what happens to the dollar, and for those holding dollars back home.
Yeah, I think at that point, you have a wave of dollar selling. Every country on the planet, nearly 85% of all oil sales have been in dollars for, the last 50 years, if not more. All of these countries, it's the foundation of their currencies. And if all of a sudden the dollar starts to tank, it'll be a tsunami of selling, sell, in order to not be crushed by the wave of.
And then guess what happens to the price of Bitcoin? Sell, sell, sell. Meaning the people are not going to trust the dollar anymore. When eggs are $50 and going up to $60 and $70, people are going to flock to Bitcoin because they're going to realize, oh crap, my dollar is worth nothing.
Selling, and I think when that happens, and you have all of the dollars hitting the shores here, you have that inflationary spike in interest rates.
Not to mention, it'll be a lot easier to verify Bitcoin than it would be to verify gold. At that time, everybody's going to want gold, but what happens when you can't get gold? Guess what you're going to flock to? You're going to flock to Bitcoin. And the reason you're going to flock to Bitcoin, A, it's easily accessible, and B, it's easily accessible. And C, you don't know if you're getting fake gold. You don't, there's so much fake gold out on the market, it's not even funny. But Bitcoin is absolutely Bitcoin off of the blockchain and verified.
It has to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. Interest rates would have to spike. And when I started in this industry, stocks and bonds were inversely correlated to one another. It was called risk on and risk off. And when you realize that they are now positively correlated to one another because interest rates have been driven so low, a spike in interest rates cripples both the bond and the stock market and, of course, the real estate market. The pillars of wealth in the United States center around stocks, bonds, and real estate. If the dollar gets dumped globally, and there's way more dollars outside the U.S. than there are domestically, if all of a sudden they get dumped globally.
Now you got to remember, everything tanks. That is according to the United States. Crypto is worldwide. That's why he says stocks, bonds, and real estate, all that remain in the U.S.
Because you don't have to hold them to buy oil anymore. And they hit our shore, spiking interest rates, you see a collapse simultaneously in all three pillars of wealth, including the dollar.
On this idea of oil, though, there has been an attempted shift away from oil towards solar, towards natural gas, towards various other forms of clean energy, nuclear even perhaps.
Which we are way behind on technology. We are trying to shift away from it, but we are not even close to shifting away from it.
Is it that relevant what oil is priced in?
No,
if the shift is away from oil?
No, because this is the whole reason that OPEC and Saudi Arabia want to leave us. Why would they want to not only receive our depreciating dollars and treasuries and sell us their oil when we're telling them in 30 years we're going to be completely green? So instead they're focusing their energy on what amounts to north of 80% of human population who is not going green and who is not challenging their way of life. And so I think it is actually the catalyst by which Saudi Arabia makes this shift. Once they have their alliances and they feel safe, I think they'll make that switch, and it will happen quickly. I think when that switch flips, it happens really quickly. But no, I think, in fact, we're making a mistake by doing that. I think we're making a very big mistake by making the admission to the Saudis that we want to go green. We're ruining their way of life is the way they're looking at it. So why would they want to do any special favors for us? And this is why they came out and said to Xi Jinping that you are our most important trade partner in oil today and for the next 50 years.
The industrial situation in China makes it so that you have to sit there and consume a ton of oil. As far as Russia's concerned, do you really think Putin cares about going green like Biden? Come on now.
That's a big deal because we've been their biggest trade partner for the last 50 years. So I think really it is the key point, only in reverse. So yeah, it matters, but it matters more for them than it does for us.
Well, because you could say that developing countries have been put off by this idea. You guys have used carbon fossil fuels to grow your economies. Now that we're trying to do the same, you're telling us, no, we can't do that and hampering our growth.
And that's why you see 152 countries on the Belt Road Initiative. Yeah. And these are all the developing nations. And that's exactly right. And this is this grouping of humanity that I think, and that's why I say the word hypocrisy. This is not my word. It's just my perception of the way that they would view us by making these declarations.
What about other commodities that are not oil that you would still need to use dollars to buy? Is that where the split then just comes in?
Well, I mean, you could argue you have to, as the dollar is the world reserve currency, all of these commodities come into play. And it's interesting, the president of one of the Asian countries, and it skips me right now, recently came out and said that these countries, because most of the rare earth metals are found in Eurasia, should institute a OPEC-style cartel for rare earth metals. And we're going green, yet most of what we need to make batteries are found in the Eurasian continent. Maybe you have to use dollars to convert to the new currency to buy rare earth metals. I don't think we've thought this through very well, and so I don't know if the dollar loses its reserve status, who's going to want to sell their commodities for dollars? First, you'll have to convert to whatever it is they want to accept.
All right, and as you said, you're joining the dots.
By commodities, he means who's going to want to sell their real estate, their houses for a worthless dollar. The whole root word of crypto calls the dollar fiat, meaning worthless.
Data points that seem to be making sense in this narrative that seems to be unfolding. What would be a projected timeline?
I don't know. I think the timing is the hard part, but I will say this. When I started talking about this 3 years ago, it was spinning slowly, and you can see the rapid ascension and the progression of these alliances being made. And just in the last few weeks, we see Saudi Arabia make that admission about China being their most important trade partner. And just last week, the admission that they're willing to accept other currencies for oil. It seems to be accelerating. And since the weaponization of the dollar in 2022, it seems to be spinning much, much faster. I don't know when the switch flips, but sooner than we probably think.
Let's now connect the two parts of de-dollarization and the Great Reset, which is an agenda of the World Economic Forum, best crystallized by the line, "You shall owe nothing and be happy," and their timeline, which of course is 2030. So make the connection for us between de-dollarization and the Great Reset, and also explaining further what the Great Reset is.
Well, that's just what I said. You have asset prices stratospherically high, where price discovery has become impossible because of the distortions in the money supply and in interest rates. And it's created environments where corporations can buy back their shares, where hedge funds can borrow money and plow it into the markets and make huge returns and huge bonuses, but have created distortions in asset prices. So if we see that moment, and when, I tried to factor in what Klaus Schwab said and the possibility of it happening, and it all centers around the weaponization of the dollar. Was it intended? Did they know that by making this unilateral move that it would create a backlash and have a villain to point to, OPEC and Russia and China, and they did it, we did it, they did it to us. And in that environment where asset prices are very high and the dollar is forsaken, creating that environment of spiked interest rates and an inflationary tsunami of dollars hitting our shore, you see everything collapse. That's when they would come in and roll out their new CBDC. We know that they're already doing it. They're already creating it. The Bank of International Settlements said every country has to have it by 2025.
By CBDC, he means blockchain, which, guess where the first blockchain came from? Bitcoin, cryptograph.
This gives them cover to roll it in. If you look at the Fed, the number 2 person at the Fed is Lael Brainerd. In fact, I thought she was going to actually win the spot for the Fed instead of Powell. They reappointed him, but they made her number 2. She's a modern monetary theorist. She wants to get rid of the commercial banks. She wants to do monetary policy directly to your iPhone. And so,
but the reason that they want to do CBDC is so that they control it. The difference between Bitcoin and CBDC is the technology is about the same. The only difference is Bitcoin is decentralized where nobody owns it.
It would fit perfectly that this would happen sometime in the next few years anyway, where she could come in and administer a central bank digital currency and from the ashes of what would be a new system. And maybe they come out and issue a gold-backed CBDC. Who knows? The point of it is that if you wanted to create a reset, and I couldn't think of any other way that they could do it, because look, if Powell wanted to create a reset himself, all he would have had to do is jacked up the reserve requirements of the banks and raise interest rates to 20%, just like Paul Volcker did. Bang, it's over, just like that. Instead, they pussyfoot around with 1.25-point interest rates that still render the return on the 10-year treasury negative. They're not doing anything to fix inflation. So if they really wanted to reset the system, jack up asset prices, and then incentivize the world to find an alternative, weaponize the dollar, and it's done for you with a villain to point to. That's why I put the dots together. Not saying it's going to happen, just simply saying, what's that, Occam's razor? You put everything together and maybe the most plausible, logical explanation is the right one. I hope I'm wrong. My youngest is 15 years old, and I don't want to be right, but I have a feeling, unfortunately, that I am.
Well, on the Occam's razor, you could say that the simplest explanation is just sheer incompetence. Never attribute to malice what can be ascribed to stupidity.
Fair enough. Either they're really, really stupid or they're nefarious.
Yeah. So let's go back to the nefarious angle, because you keep on saying they. Who is the they here?
Who's behind the World Economic Forum? The Federal Reserve, they have to understand that we've dug ourselves into a hole that we can never dig ourselves out of. A trillion seconds ago was 31.
I've been saying this to people. The Federal Reserve.
1,688 years ago. How do you dig yourself out of 100+ trillion in debt as interest rates rise? You don't. You can't. And so they, being the people that realize the mathematics have gotten too big and we have squeezed as much utility out of a currency, a dying currency, and a Keynesian system as we humanly possibly can. So either we default or inflate. I guess that's really the only 2 options.
Or, as you suggest, burn the whole thing down
Yes.
and start over with a CBDC.
Take the monopoly board and throw it up in the air and start over, new game. And that is the conclusion that I came up with only by connecting these dots and saying,
Why would people go along with it? Why would people that have a lot at stake in the current monetary system not push back on this? The billionaires of the
I
world,
would
for
argue,
example.
why do you see record withdrawals off the COMEX and the LBMA, where the LBMA is losing not only its base metals, but all its precious metals, where the COMEX is at the lowest level of inventory in terms of what they have in the registered category, maybe.
BlackRock, Citadel, Goldman Sachs, Tesla. They are all getting into crypto massively. We've been seeing it all around.
Or close to it, but a massive drawdown. Why are we seeing the central banks buy more gold than at any time in the last 55 years? The people who are closest to the information and have the most money, they're making an exodus quietly. Why do we see India import 400 million ounces of silver and the mainstream isn't talking about it? These countries not only are, and players, wealthy family offices, sovereign wealth funds, they're not just accumulating the metal, they're withdrawing it off of the exchanges.
Silver and gold.
Yes, and where it loses a good deal of its industrial liquidity. If you want to have metal as an investment, you leave it in the COMEX warehouses because you have industrial liquidity, where Elon Musk says, I'll pay $50 premium for every ounce of silver people want to sell. No, this stuff is being shipped outside the exchanges. It's a very big deal. So to your point, just like in 1933 when gold was confiscated, so much of it, the insiders shipped their gold to the safe deposit boxes by steamship of Switzerland before FDR confiscated gold. Maybe these people who are draining the exchanges in a precipitous way for the last 3 years are front-running what is coming. And so most people in this country, 60% of them or so, are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't even write out a check for $5,000. So they'll be happy to be given stimulus and handouts attached to a new central bank.
And then guess what happens? Oh, wait. They don't trust the US dollar anymore. The US dollar that they were currently saving up is only worth pennies on the dollar. And guess where they go to? Decentralization. They start to understand how to use blockchain. It becomes every day, like your credit card, your phones, your internet. It just becomes every day.
Digital currency.
And of course, with the central bank digital currency, which is programmable, you just click and everybody automatically gets what they need.
That's right.
So break down
Instantly. It's beautiful technology.
the relationship between the CBDCs. Well, firstly, is it one CBDC representing the BRICS, backed by commodities? And then how do the other countries come in with their versions of CBDCs?
So I think ultimately it will be one. A lot of the countries...
One universal.
Yes, for the CBDC. But right now they're all creating their own. And the Chinese built something called the M Bridge, as in Mary, M Bridge, which is a cross-border payment system for central bank digital currencies. And they did this with United Arab Emirates and one other company, Singapore, I forgot the third country, but it's irrelevant. The point is that this allows cross-border payments sidestepping the SWIFT system in central bank digital currencies. That's the bridge, if you will, to a common currency. But they are all de-dollarizing. They are all moving away from the dollar as sole settlement.
What a lot of people don't realize is right now the SEC, the United States, is so dumb. It's crazy. The SEC has RippleNet, XRP tied up in court. And they have more bridges and far superior technology to China right now. And they could be using RippleNet to get ahead for the value that they create.
And Turkey just created their own. Turkey also imported more gold than any country in the world last year. And they just applied for BRICS. So they're all doing it little by little by little. They asked Ernest Hemingway, I believe, how'd you go broke? Little by little by little, then all at once. And I think that's what's happening.
Slowly then suddenly.
It's a chess game. And they're moving the pieces and then they say checkmate. But not until they're all in position. So to your point earlier, question, timing? Don't know, but watch how the chess pieces keep.
So how does gold play into this role? If you're backed by commodities, you eliminate the option of printing, which takes away.
Gold's always going to have value. I will not debase gold at all. It is a currency that will last all time. People just have always used it, transacted with it.
A lot of power for the central banks themselves,
Absolutely.
as they've been able to do for their own countries. But I get that they would need to do this to have legitimacy on the global stage. So they would have to, I guess, sacrifice the ability to print money in order to be seen legitimate on the world stage.
I think they would do it in two ways. They would not allow it to be convertible, because de Gaulle from France proved that convertible currencies convert, and they would fractionalize it. Maybe 20% of every new BRICS currency is pegged to gold, or to a commodity that is shown, the veracity and the immutability of which is shown on their distributed ledger. So I don't think it would be a one-to-one pegging. That would still give them the latitude to enact monetary policy, but I think gold would be the anchor. Instead of being able to let them print unabated, it would allow them at least to run monetary policy with some tether to prudence.
So
that's not even true. Gold used to be the anchor. And the problem with using gold as the anchor is then we just go back to the same system we were at and debasing and going back to the same currency.
let's assume we've listened to you and we've bought some gold ourselves. Let's assume it's 2030, which is the timeline of the World Economic Forum, which is only 7 years away.
Right.
And we've got central bank digital currencies, which to me are very terrifying because every single transaction can be seen by the government. Every single time you spend, pay for something, zero privacy, zero anonymity, and perhaps more concerningly, the ability to program when and what you can spend on. But let's assume we're there. But I've listened to Andy and I've bought some gold, and I have my gold bars and gold coins and silver coins safely hidden away. How would I practically be able to use that to my benefit in this world?
Because I think it allows you safety when the system collapses. So,
but how much safety does it really offer? Let's say the U.S. gets debased, and the value of our dollar bill is worth virtually nothing. What's to keep, police at work when it comes to protecting you against people coming in your house and stealing all your gold?
look, if a CBDC rolls out and we all have no choice but to use it, either you use it or you're in a black market. But what it does is it gives you options when others have none. And that's why guys like Jim Rickards and Jim Sinclair say gold will reach crazy levels, 10,000 an ounce, because it'll be pegged to a new system. So not only does it allow you not just to survive, maybe even thrive. Maybe this is why the biggest money in the world is drawing down the supplies of all of these exchanges before it becomes obvious that's their life raft. But it'll be options. And what? Maybe you have to sell it and go into the new CBDC when you decide to do it. We have to play within the game that, the rules that are afforded to us. But I think it gives you options when others have none.
So it would allow me to preserve my wealth.
Yes.
And then I would need to convert it, I suppose, into CBDCs in order to function.
Correct. Or
in the system.
barter, I guess, in theory. But
or perhaps have a side system where people are dealing
well,
with.
you never know. I guess it depends how the CBDC goes over.
Where do you see something like Bitcoin play into this? Because we've had people who are saying the same narrative, but instead of gold, they have Bitcoin as the answer.
I'm not.
Now look behind him. He owns a company that is based off gold, First Mining Gold. So before he answers this, I'm going to tell you, this guy knows absolutely nothing about blockchain or Bitcoin, and it reflects in his answer. But first off, look behind him. Sponsored by First Mining Gold.
A Bitcoin basher, but I look at gold as it's lived through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic, and it's still immutable wealth.
He's not wrong. But at the same time, if they're going to be going to blockchain, they're going to be going to a world currency that's bought by Russia, bought by China, bought by pretty much around the world. Which one are they going to go to first? Especially in times of need. Which is the most accessible when you have the internet?
This is the only asset every central bank owns, gold. And I think that there are some that own Bitcoin, not all of them.
Getting the gold is going to be let's say it collapses tomorrow. Getting the gold is going to be really hard, but Bitcoin, very accessible.
Well, on that point, Canada, correct me if I'm wrong, where we currently are, has sold off the majority of its gold.
And then so did Bank of England.
Not to mention gold's heavy. You can't really transact with it in the way you can with Bitcoin. Not to mention somebody can come in and steal your gold at any time. With Bitcoin, you can literally keep it safe in your head.
Canada has practically no gold.
Stupid. Well, maybe they think it's the gold in the ground. Maybe at that point they nationalize it. I don't know. It makes zero sense. It really does. But, again, that was a trend that was happening for quite some time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they just bought some gold for the first time. Not mistaken. They just bought some in 2022. Now, I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Point of it is that I think there will come a realization that
regardless, Canada is heavily invested into crypto. What's his name? Kevin O'Leary comes from Canada. Very big into crypto.
Interest-bearing assets in this environment isn't the most important thing. And you would think a country like Canada would wise up. They certainly have a lot of it in the ground, some of the most in the world. So maybe that will be their answer to this, is we nationalize the mines and don't allow any of it to leave the country. Don't know. Right. But it's a good point.
Yeah,
you bring up a lot of good points.
Thank you. It's a scary world you're painting here, Andy. Again, is there a mastermind? Is this orchestrated by someone, or is this just how things develop and certain players are positioning themselves to take advantage of it?
Are there ever coincidences? I don't know. I would like the scariest part of it all, Michelle, is there a mastermind behind it? If it is, it makes it much more frightening because it is orchestrated, it is thought out, it is planned out. And maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe it's circumstances that have come into play that are now being taken advantage of to paint the narrative or a picture that they want. And who's they? I don't know. They are the ones that are pulling the strings. The Federal Reserve, the big money, the World Economic Forum. Maybe they have more clout and more pull than we think. But anyways.
You're getting a lot of I don't know from this guy, because the truth is, if this does happen and then this narrative plays out and the world collapse of the US dollar happens tomorrow, they're going to convert to blockchain, USDC, or USDC, because it's the most accessible right now and most heavily invested into by the banks blockchain out there. Gold will still have value, yes, but not nearly as much value as the blockchain itself and the accessibilities of blockchain. Truth is, let's say it happens tomorrow, you're not going to be running to a pawn shop being able to use your US dollar to pay for gold. So they're going to have to come out with a system, and guess what? Guess who's going to have the only system in between? People that own crypto, because you can convert crypto into the ruble, you can convert crypto into the U.S. dollar, the USDC, USDT, very accessible means to be able to have trade, and this is a thesis that actually plays out very, very well, because it wouldn't be the end of the world. It's just the end of the U.S. financial system, where they sit here and they give out a different stable coin instead. This is Crypto. If you like this material, and if you really, really want to get ahead of the system, and you really want a transfer of wealth, Bitcoin, crypto, it's the way to do it. So do me a favor, like and subscribe to this material. I'm not very good on camera. This is just all a point. I just watched this video and I got so excited. So please like and subscribe. Pass this along, because if this narrative plays out, guess what? You are going to be very, very wealthy, just not with US dollars. Meaning you will have a point of an exchange that will elevate your wealth to a different standard of, like, nobody could even understand. Truth is, if you want to buy gold too, go for it. But understanding that this narrative could play out makes me very, very, very bullish. So whether the price is going up, whether the price is going down, don't worry about it. Just like and subscribe. Crypto out.